But he says, if a person is a critical idealist, in the beginning of chapter 5 now, he's going to take us, chapter 5 is called Knowing the World. Hallelujah. The sun is finally coming up out of the dark clouds of chapter 4. But so he says, we cannot prove that our percepts are mental pictures just by investigating the content of what we're observing. Yeah. So he says, the idea being that we're not really dealing with the thing in itself, but only with a mental picture of things. And of course, really, you could say in the model that Rudolf Steiner was addressing, percept and mental picture is not distinguished in critical idealism. If we wanted to say what critical idealism is saying, if we wanted to use something similar, we could say we have thinking on the one side, which critical idealism isn't particularly paying attention to, but thinking and mental picture is placed between the thinker and the object. Yeah. So for the critical idealist, the object, what we get of the object is the mental picture. This is the view of critical idealism. They're not really calling us a percept. And Rudolf Steiner is the one who has to say, no, when I'm looking at an object in the world, an object which is outside of me, that object belongs to the outer world. But if I can also recreate the image of that object within me, and I can remember the object, and that remembrance is actually the mental picture. The mental picture is what belongs to me after I've observed the object. So he says, actually, so Steiner is actually distinguishing, he says mental picture is actually the wrong name for this phenomena. Rudolf Steiner replaces the idea that the mental picture, that the object somehow impinges upon us and is a mental picture. Rather, he says, no, it's the content of perception. This is actually a percept. And the mental picture actually is what is retained within the inner world after it's thought about. Yeah. So the mental picture actually belongs to the thinker. So critical idealism, in a certain sense, has short-circuited, it's overlooked the difference between an observation that I'm having in the moment of an object outside of me. It's calling the content of what I'm perceiving a mental picture. And Rudolf Steiner says, wait a minute, that's not really clear. A mental picture is actually what I retain. But while I'm observing something, it's not a mental picture, it's a percept. It's the content of perception. Yeah. So Steiner is having to introduce something into this framework to clarify it by saying, no, the world is not my mental picture, the world is the content of what I perceive that I then think about and form a mental picture about. Yeah. So although he's had to introduce another element in, he's doing it for the sake of clarity. Now, so in addition to this, we'll see that there's actually an advantage to Rudolf Steiner's point of view. And in fact, because there's certainly a difference between an apple that I'm gazing upon in my hand and a mental picture of an apple. I can eat the apple in my hand, yes, but I can't really eat the mental picture of an apple. So if I have an actual apple in my hand as an object and I perceive it as a percept, and I can taste it and delightfully eat it and enjoy an actual apple. But if you said, well, an apple is just a mental picture, okay, I have a mental picture of an apple in my hand. When I go to eat it, there's nothing there. So a mental picture is an inner construct that I retain reference to. But an apple that I'm perceiving, that I can actually eat, is actually an object which I'm perceiving. We see the difference. Yeah? Pretty big difference. Yeah. So Rudolf Steiner's clarification is very helpful. Now he's got to lead us a little bit further down this path before he's going to show us the sunrise. So he says, if you are a critical idealist, there are two possibilities open to you. Yeah? If we assume that the world is our mental picture, then there are two kinds of ways to respond to that idea. One, you could say, well, you mean everything that I perceive is just a picture? It's not really real? If the world is my mental picture, then the picture, how do I know that the picture, if I don't really know what the object is, if I call the object that I can't know a thing in itself, and in fact Kant says, we never know a thing in itself, we only know the mental picture, yeah? This is what Immanuel Kant says. The object is therefore unknowable. So you could say, well, from the point of view of a philosopher, well, if I can't really know the object because it's a thing in itself, which whenever I get the whole thing in my observation, if I can't really know the thing in itself, then why even bother? Yeah? Why bother? If I'm just in a world of illusion and this world is just a big game, there's two kinds of people. There are people who think that the world is real, and then there are the wise people who realize that this is just a dream. The world is just a dream. So row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Yeah. So you could say, one point of view is to say, well, if I can never know what the actual apple is, yeah, all I know is my mental picture of it, I don't really know the real apple, then you could say, well, if I can't know it, why should I continue really to be interested in it? If it's an illusion, it's an illusion. So one variation of critical idealism is illusionism. The wise people realize that we're in a world of Maya and illusion, and they stop playing. They just say, it really doesn't matter. Of course, now there's all kinds of problems with that point of view, and it's an escapist point of view from a particular standpoint. But one could say, so illusionism is one path that critical idealism could take. But of course, that leads to all kinds of problems. But that is one option open to a person who realizes the futility of trying to actually perceive or actually understand a thing in itself, realizing that they can't. It's just an illusion. Why bother? But the other, he says, but there are people who try to transcend the limitation of their perceiving. They say, well, the mental picture, I'll take this off now. The mental picture might retain something, even though the mental picture is not the thing in itself. Even though the mental picture is not the thing in itself, the mental picture might still retain some characteristics of the thing in itself. Yeah? In other words, I don't trust what my senses give me, because those places, friends, our senses are the window that are apparently, on the one hand, they're revealing their world to us. On the other hand, they're masking their world from us in the point of view of critical idealism. We can't really trust our senses is the fundamental premise of critical idealism. Our senses are changing the object into a mental picture, and therefore the senses are a problem. Now Rudolf Steiner he agrees to this only to a minimal degree. He says actually the whole process of the way a percept arises is a problem, but the way that critical idealism is dealing with it is not really going to take us very far, nonetheless. So if the senses are actually altering our perception of the object, the second variation of critical idealism is say, if the mental picture might retain some trace of the actual thing in itself, there might be some clues. If I can be a good detective, or if I can read the phenomena of the mental picture, there might be something of the thing in itself that has left a clue or a few clues within the mental picture, and maybe I can transcend the limit of my sensing the object to trick the thing, and to trick the thing in itself into revealing its true nature. You with me? So the mental picture might retain a vague impression of something having to do with the thing in itself, and therefore perhaps I can transcend my sensing the object and trick the object into revealing its true nature. So that point of view is called transcendental realism. Yeah. Transcendental realism. We understand transcendental here is not necessarily a completely spiritual point of view. It's really an idea, I have to transcend the limitation of my sensing to try to trick the mental picture into telling me something about the thing in itself. Okay? So these are the 2 points of view. These are the 2 outcomes of critical idealism. I can either stop playing the game because it's foolish, or why bother if I can't ever know, or if I am actually serious about trying to know, I can take the path of transcendental realism and investigate the mental picture for traces of the thing in itself. Now, Rudolf Steiner actually goes, he says, well, at least, I mean, there's nothing you can say to a person who's decided not to play. There's very little you can say. You can try to convince them that their life is worth living and that this is actually serious and there are some implications and some, consequences of living a life with the idea of illusion. But those who really are serious about trying to figure out what reality is, or trying to transcend the limitation of sensing, at least these people they're staying in the game. Yeah, they're interested. So he says we have to begin then to deal with the idea of transcendental realism and take it as a true situation. Now he said, if we begin to investigate what this thing in itself actually is, he says the idea that the thing in itself is separate from the mental picture that's really the key of the problem. Kant introduces this idea that the mental picture is what we get, but a thing in itself always eludes us. This is kind of, it's a mystical separation, and in a certain sense, it's almost like Kant, without intending to, he kind of enchanted philosophy, and many main philosophers fell under the spell of this idea. Yes, Hegel, Schelling, Fichte, they, in a certain sense, Schopenhauer, they fell under the spell of the brilliance of this idea, but the consequences lead into frustration, they lead into kind of dead ends. And so Rudolf Steiner is perceiving that there's a problem with that very idea, and he says we have to go about solving this riddle in another way. So he's already begun to introduce that by saying, first of all, we need to distinguish that the content of what we perceive from an object is not a mental picture. It actually is a percept. It's the content of perception. Yeah? And we need to distinguish it from the content of perception that we retain within ourselves. The mental picture does belong to me. Certainly my mental picture of an elephant is not an elephant. But when I'm standing in front of an elephant, gazing upon the elephant, I actually am perceiving an elephant. There's a difference. Yeah? So while I'm perceiving an element, that's not a mental picture. That's the content of perception. Now he says the problem is that their point of view is that there's something like, if the things that we experience were mental pictures, then everyday life would be like a dream, and knowledge of the thing in itself would be like waking up. This is the argument that he's going to place. It's on page 77. And intuitive thinking is a spiritual path. So if the things we experience, if we experience the world only as a mental picture, and the mental picture is like a dream, then if we could know the thing in itself, that would be like waking up. Yeah? He says now, our dream images interest us only as long as we dream and do not see through their dream nature. But when we wake up, we're no longer asked about the interconnection of our dream images, but we ask about the physical, physiological, and psychological processes that underlie them. So we know that our dream images are produced by various states of our own being. Yeah? So if they admit an existent I at all, they will not ask how one mental picture connects with another. They'll ask what is going on in the soul that exists independently from themselves, while their consciousness retains a specific sequence of mental images. He uses an example. If you dream that you're drinking wine that causes burning in your throat, that's your dream. You're dreaming that you're waking up, well, somebody waking up in the middle of the night, you dream that you're drinking wine and the wine is burning your throat. And then you wake up with a cough. All of a sudden, you begin to realize that the dream was a symptom of the actual state of your throat. That the dream was a picture, but you're no longer interested in the wine that you were drinking. You're realizing, no, I've got a sore throat. I need to wake up and take care of the sore throat. It wasn't the wine that I didn't drink. The dream of the wine was somehow a picture of the sore throat that I woke up with. You with me? Mm-hmm. So he says, similarly, as soon as philosophers are convinced that the given world has the character of a mental picture, they should immediately pass over it to the real soul lying behind the mental picture. Now he says, of course the matter is worse if illusionism completely denies an I in itself behind the mental pictures, or at least holds it to be unknowable. We can be led to such a view easily if we observe that, in contrast to dreaming, there is a state of waking. So we could say we have dreaming, but in contrast to the state of dreaming, there is waking consciousness. Yeah? And certainly there's a difference. We all agree there's a difference between these two states, yes? Between dreaming and waking. So dreaming and waking, so he says, there is a state of waking in which we have the opportunity to see through the dreams and relate the dreams to real events. But the argument goes that there is no state that stands in a similar relationship to waking consciousness. So, those who profess this view lack the insight that there is something that relates to mere perception, as experiences in the waking state relate to drinking, to thinking. So there are those who, there is something that relates to perception. So we can say, if perceiving is like dreaming, this is actually a beautiful perceiving. Yeah? If perceiving, in the perceiving, we are receiving a mental picture, if that were the case. If perceiving is a mental picture, which is similar to a dream, the argument goes that there's nothing equivalent we have the difference between dreaming and waking consciousness, but there's nothing that wakes us up out of perceiving. There's nothing that brings clarity into our perceiving. And Rudolf Steiner says, wait a minute, there is. What is it? Thinking, you see? So thinking, not drinking, but thinking is in fact that which brings clarity to the state of perceiving. Just as waking consciousness, we wake up out of the pictures of the dream and understand them. In our perceiving, if the perceiving are dreamlike images, thinking brings clarity, because thinking, as we have seen, weaves concepts in relationship to what we're observing and brings us to understand the content of what we're perceiving. So, in a certain sense, Rudolf Steiner is riddling his way out of critical idealism into something which will begin to give us strength. Now, the next thing he has to deal with the naive realist. So, in a certain sense, Rudolf Steiner has disarmed the point of view of critical idealism. You know? He's shown that there is a way out of it. On the other hand, he says there are still the people who say, the critical idealist is the problem of the critical, rather of the naive realist is, how does thinking relate to perception? So Rudolf Steiner has to say first of all, to a naive realist, if you're going to talk about an object, the only thing you can say about an object, you say it because you think about the object. If you take the object to be complete without your thinking, what right do you have to do? On the bottom of page 79, this is a kind of an insulting assertion, but you need to be able to say it. We need to be able to say it to ourselves. If I say, you know, there is actually a candle there, and anything I would say about the candle through thinking is merely adding something onto it. In other words, the concept of the candle is merely something that I have attached to the candle. You know? Then maybe the concept doesn't really belong to the candle. This would be a naive realistic point of view. The candle is a candle is a candle. Anything I think about it, anything I say about it, is merely adding on to it something which is foreign to it. That would be a point of view. Yeah? And that point of view would be naive realism. Yeah. A rose is a rose is a rose. Yes. Now, but he says, naive consciousness treats thinking as something that has nothing to do with the things. I'm on page 79. Nothing to do with the things, and stands together apart from them, altogether apart from them, making its observations about the world. For naive consciousness, the picture of the phenomena of the world sketched by a thinker does not count as something integral to the things of the world, but as something that exists only in the human head. Thinking only happens in the human head. It has nothing to do with the object. This is the point of view of naive realism. The world is complete and finished with all its substances and forces, and human beings make a picture of this finished world in their heads. Now, to those who think like this, we need only ask, by what right do you declare the world to be finished without thinking? An insulting and somewhat kind of a very interesting point of view. By what right do you declare the world to be finished without thinking? Does not the world bring forth thinking in human heads with the same necessity as the world brings forth blossoms on the plant? Wow. An interesting idea. Plant a seed in the earth. It puts forth roots and stem. It unfolds into leaves and blossoms. Set the plant before you. It links itself to a specific concept in your soul. What kind of plant is this? What's going on here? What stage of development is it? What color will the flowers be? How many petals? Why does the concept belong to the plant any less than leaves and blossoms do? You might reply that leaves and blossoms are present without a perceiving subject, while the concept appears only when a human being confronts the plant. Very well. But blossoms and leaves arise in the plant only when there is earth in which the seed can be laid, and light and air in which leaves and blossoms can unfold. Just so, the concept of the plant arises when thinking consciousness approaches the plant. A very interesting point of view, isn't it? So now he goes on to say, it is quite arbitrary to consider as a totality, a whole, the sum of what we experience of a thing through perception alone, and to regard what results from thinking about what we're observing as something to be something appended to it. If I'm given that has nothing to do with the thing itself. If I'm given a rosebud today, the picture of the rosebud offers itself to my perception. But if I put the bud in water, the present moment when the rosebud is closed, if I watch it over time, it will unfold in an infinite series of stages into a rose. So why should I say that the rosebud is the whole thing? Because the rosebud is always changing and always becoming something. So to take an incidental moment and to say that that is the rose is not really a fair thing. I'm not allowing the thing to unfold in time and in space. In the same way, friends, to take a moment of a person's biography and say that that is the human being is also not fair. You could take your worst moment and say, well, that's who I really am, and boy, then life doesn't look very good. You could also take your best moment and say, this is who I am. But of course, that's also, it's a limited point of view. So he says, to take the content of what we observe at any moment, what we're observing at any moment is not the whole rose from the seed to the unfolding into the leaf and the stem and the blossom and so forth. We don't see the unfolding of the rose at any incidental moment. We see one stage of it. Yeah. So the content of what we're observing is not the whole thing, but we will understand the whole thing if we do a series of observations and we think about the observations and we realize that the object is unfolding in time. You with me? Mm-hmm. So he says, so it is completely unrealistic, the bottom of page 80, it is completely unrealistic to grasp at accidental elements and to declare the picture revealed at a particular time, that is the thing, because the thing is changing. It is just as untenable to declare the sum of the perceptual characteristics to be the object. Certainly it would be possible for a spirit to be able to receive a concept at the same time as and unseparated from a percept. Rudolf Steiner actually goes on, friends, in his later writings to declare that there are beings. For us, the knowledge of an object arises in two stages. If someone has a rose, we bring this beautiful flower. If we have a flower, they're for us. Who brought these, by the way? They belong to the classroom. The teacher probably forgot it. So look at these beautiful blossoms. Yeah. So we see what incredible beauty nature unfolds before our eyes. So we could say, if we begin to really appreciate these beautiful flowers, we begin to understand them. For us, there are actually a variety of flowers in here. Yeah. Are they all roses? How do you know? So there are many. So this is a rose. This is a rose. These are roses here. Now this is not a rose, or is it?
It's a tea rose.
It's a tea rose. Okay. And what about this? Definitely not a rose. Yeah. So and we have other flowers here, which actually quite gorgeous. Yeah.
Love in the mist.
Yes. Love in the mist?
Love in the mist.
Love in the mist, yes. So friends, so we begin to realize that the flower itself, you know, the flower, we don't understand the entire flower because each flower is different, but each flower has its own characteristic. There is an idea which is distinguishing each one of these flowers. The idea isn't added onto it. The idea, we see that this is a completely different growth pattern. There's a different idea blossoming here than there is here. There's a different idea blossoming. Yeah? So we begin to realize that the idea is manifesting itself in the rose. Yeah? This is the point of view of Aristotle, point of view of Goethe as well. There's a different idea manifesting in the rose than there is in this particular blossom or in love in the mist. Yes. So we begin to see that the percept by itself, the content of what we're perceiving, actually has within it an idea, and our observation and our thinking bring the idea forth. Now, there are beings for whom, so I didn't know this was a love in the mist. Thank you for giving, you triggered a concept in me. Now I'll have to do some more research on love in the mist, just to understand them even further. Do more observing and more thinking about them. Now he says there are beings for whom there is no separation between the perceiving and the concept. Yeah. Those beings are called angels. For an angel, when they perceive something, the concept is there along with the perception. In fact, that used to be the way it was for us as well, way back in the distant past. In primeval times, the idea of a thing, the nature of a thing presented itself to us with the content of our perception. Gradually, we inserted ourselves in between these two things and separated the concept from the perception. Okay? This is an important idea. This is a very important idea. That in effect, the concept and percept were one in the world of a kind of undivided monistic worldview. When something approached us, we immediately had a sensation or a knowing, an inner knowing, whether the thing approaching us was friendly or unfriendly, whether it was healthy or unhealthy, helpful or unhelpful, harmful or benevolent. Now we actually have to observe and think, is that person coming at me to be helpful, or is that person coming at me as a threat? So now there is a gap between the content of what we observe, and we have to think about it, and we have to somehow we have to form a mental picture by strenuously, or perhaps not so strenuously, thinking about what we're observing to form an understanding of it. But the reason that happens is because the consciousness of ourself has inserted itself into the whole process. So when we were one with the world, we were one with the world, and the percept and the concept were deeply wedded. But we came to the wedding and we inserted ourselves between the two of them and kind of separated them apart. Now, why did we do that? What's the advantage?
Freedom.
The possibility of freedom arises, and the possibility of becoming aware not only of the being approaching us, but also being aware of ourself. Becoming self-conscious is an important step onto becoming free. So effectively what has happened is he says it would be possible, and in fact it is still possible. Angels have not inserted themselves in between these two things. So for angels, as soon as they perceive something, they know exactly what it is. Rudolf Steiner goes on to say, angels cannot make a mistake. The thinking of an angel is completely aligned with the content of what they observe, and they never make mistakes. Isn't that remarkable? Can you imagine never making a mistake? That when you perceive something, you already have the full understanding of it? That's not my experience. My experience is the world poses itself as a riddle, and I have to think a great deal to try to figure out what the heck this is. So Rudolf Steiner is using us certainly it would be possible, top of page 81, certainly it would be possible for a spirit to be able to receive a concept at the same time as and unseparated from a percept. He's not just making that up. He's actually had the experience that is possible. Such a spirit would then never think of regarding the concept as something not belonging to the object, but such a being would ascribe the concept as an existence inseparable from the object. So he uses an example. Someone come up here with me? Just for a moment and toss something to you, please. Yeah. Okay, so watch the path of this object, okay? Watch the path of this object. Friends, you ready? Come a little closer. That's good. Okay, here we go. Toss it back. Good one. Do it again. Okay. Toss it high. Good. Now friends, all those curves, how do we know where it's going? You see the beginning of the curve, and you realize that it will descend on the same path. Yeah? As a curve begins, it will descend on the same path. You with me? And every one of those paths is a parabola. Yeah? Did you ever think about that? Every time you throw an object in the air, it will return that same path. We're done. Thank you. So all these paths, the path that curve is taking is a parabola. So the parabola is actually a geometrical form which is predictable. I had the experience with my son when my son Joel was very young. He loved baseball, and we started pitching the ball. And he when I pitched it to him, he did fine. When I would hit the ball to him, he would run back too far, he would run too far forward, until the first few times. And then all of a sudden, he noticed it, and he never missed the ball after that. He became a very good ball player. So in other words, there's something about watching the beginning of the arc, and you turn around, you run to the right spot, and you stand there, and there the ball arrives. Exactly. So this arc that an object which is thrown, it always takes the path which is predictable, a parabolic path. As it begins, so it will end. Yeah? Now, just for observation, we never make that observation. Yeah? But when we think about the path of that object as it's moving through space, we realize that that curve is a parabola. And in fact, that's the way ball players operate. Basketball, tennis, whatever it is. Golf, all these different, anybody who's hitting an object in the air and letting it land or throwing it are using the idea of the parabola. Now, if you ask Tiger Woods, are you worried that that's a parabola? He may or may not have completely brought the idea of parabola consciously, but he certainly can hit the ball exactly where he wants it to go. Yeah? So we begin to realize that there is an idea in the hitting of an object. There's an idea in the throwing of the object. So that idea belongs to the phenomena just as much as the throwing of the object belongs. You with me? So in other words, the concept does not arise through observation. The concept arises by thinking about the observation. Yeah? But the concept is inherent in what we're perceiving. It's just that what we perceive is given to us, and the concept, we have to do something, we have to think to produce it. Yeah? But the concept isn't something that we added unlawfully. Well, sometimes we do. If I said that curve was actually a square, or if it was always a straight line, yeah, wait a minute, what about that? That's not a straight line. So I could make some false assumptions. It is possible for me to make a mistake, to put the wrong concept onto a phenomenon. But the wonderful thing about it is, friends, and for science this is also a beautiful thing, if science has a wrong hypothesis, over time other people who are doing the same experiment will realize, you said it was like this, but what my experience is that is not what really is going on. So science keeps correcting itself, yes? Because there's a recognition that a particular concept fits only a certain number of phenomena, but not all of them. We need to then broaden the observations so that we can have new concepts to match the existing situation. But if there was not a lawful relationship between the concept and the percept, science would be nothing but a joke. because science is actually the search for the idea in the object, the idea in the phenomena. So Rudolf Steiner is actually, he wants science to take itself more seriously. He wants scientists to become more clear about what they're actually doing. The scientific method, setting up an experiment and so forth, is actually an attempt to observe a phenomena and to try to find the concepts that belong to that phenomena. Yeah? If we're clear about that, then we're farther down the road. Yeah? So he says our whole being functions in such a way that the world of the elements of the world flow to us from two sides, from the side of perceiving and from the side of thinking. So the whole world presents itself from two sides. Now friends, I'm going to do something dramatic here. Do something radical? Nothing radical yet, but now we're going to do something radical. We're going to say that could it be, I'm going to take this off so it won't confuse us. What he has just said is that the whole world presents itself from two sides. From the side of perceiving, we have objects arising for our perception, but from the side of thinking, we have concepts arising. Yeah? We have concepts arising from one side, and we have the content of our perception, our percepts arising from the other side. But he's saying that these two things are actually two sides of the same coin. Wow! Yes? These two things are not two separate things. It's the same thing presenting itself in two different forms. Hallelujah! Now we're on the road to figuring out how we know the world. The concept that I try to stick on, if I try to stick it on unlawfully, a concept that doesn't belong to the content of what I'm perceiving, I will soon figure out that it doesn't fit. Yeah? So I keep trying to put my hand through the blackboard, and it doesn't work. If I say, well, the blackboard is really made up of atoms, and the atoms have space in them, between them, and my hand is made up of atoms, and my hand, therefore, has space between the atoms of my hand. I should be able to ram my hand right through that blackboard, right? Wrong. It doesn't work. Yeah? So now I have to come up with another hypothesis. But if, in fact, the whole world is presenting itself, if the same phenomena is presenting itself from two different sides, I realize that the concept belongs to that phenomena just as much as what I observe of the phenomena. What I perceive and what I think, my job as a thinker is to think lawfully with what I'm observing to find the lawful concept that belongs to it. Yeah? But when I do so, I have discovered something. Yeah? So at the bottom of page 81, our whole being functions in such a way that for everything in reality, the elements flow to us from two sides, from the side of perceiving and from the side of thinking. How I am organized to comprehend things, how I'm organized, has nothing to do with the nature of the thing. The thing is a thing, yes, but how I approach it, I don't get. When I approach a rose, I don't get the idea rose without thinking about it. I certainly don't get the idea of love in the mist if I'm really observing it, yes? You have to help me understand what love in the mist really is. So you could say, when I observe an object, the whole of the object does not present itself to me. Part of the object presents it to me as the percept, but the other part of the object I have to find through my activity of thinking. And if I think about the percept, I will find the whole thing. So reality actually belongs in the union of the percept and the concept. The concept isn't something I added to it. The concept is already there. My task is to discover it. Question? Yeah.
I've noticed with my kindergartners that they're very good at that.
They're
a lot faster, especially some of them.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, that's to say this next generation is very bright. They really are very active. But the truth of the matter is, friends, a young child is actually deeply engaged in this activity. And it's a lot more, they're not as self-conscious, they're not as afraid of making mistakes, and they're deeply interested in the world because they're continually thinking about what they're observing. And they don't have to be cool, about it. They can really, they just spontaneously, they're participating. They love the world and they're actively trying to figure it out, asking questions. So we begin to see, friends, this is a model we can begin to live with. Yeah? But what it takes is, stretching our idea of the concept, that the concept actually belongs to what we're observing just as much as what we perceive. Yeah? And we have not been taught that in school. Yeah? We don't understand what a concept really is. We don't understand that a concept actually belongs to what we're observing. Many of us, I think, I certainly was educated in the idea that a concept is something you add to perception, but it doesn't really, it's just something that you add. Yeah? It's not necessarily inherent in the reality of the thing. Now, so he says, because of the way we're organized, the world approaches us. An object which is complete in itself. There is an object which is complete. The object has its idea, its concept, and its manifestation as a perceptible reality. The object is, but you wouldn't call it an object in itself. You would say a complete object has two facets to it. There's part of it which can be perceived, and the other part, for me, has to be thought. But so far as the object is concerned, it's not concerned, well, how is my perceptible part doing, and is my idea correct? The object is not concerned about that. The object is complete. But when I approach it, I don't get the concept along with what I observe. I observe what I see of it, then I have to think about it to find the missing piece. So this is the reason that we have a fundamental urge to know. You see, inherently, we realize this isn't the whole thing. Yeah? What is this? When you tell me it's love in the midst, that adds a whole new possibility to me. Yeah? In the field of research. Yeah? So the object is not complete in what we perceive. It's only complete when we think about it and find the concept that belongs to it. Then we begin to get reality. Now he says it's because we assert ourselves in between these two phenomena that they arise in two stages. Usually the observation is the first, and then we think. So somebody presents something to us, and we say, "Thank you very much." What is this? You've ever had this situation? What do I do with this? So the object presents itself to you as a percept, but then you have to riddle it through. So what is this, and what do I do with it, and what's the proper response to give to the person who has given me this? So the thinking usually arises as a second stage. Usually we start with observation and then we think to try to find the concept. Now, friends, this is called science. Science is actually when we're given something, we're given the content of what we observe, and our task as a scientist is to find the concepts that lawfully belong. Yeah. And when we do those two things, though, we have the act of knowing. So I'm going to leap ahead and say it right here. This is called the act of knowing. When we find the percept, when we're starting from the content of what we perceive, the percept, we find the lawful concept. This axis we will call the axis of knowing. The axis of knowing. And we can call this activity science. That is, the observation usually comes earlier, and the concept of the thinking often happens afterwards. Now, it is possible that I've observed something and I form a hypothesis, and then I'm going to approach the phenomena once again to see if my hypothesis holds true. Yeah? I might have an idea about something, but usually I'm starting from something that I've observed, I'm asking a question about it, I'm forming an idea, I'm forming a possible idea that might fit the phenomena, and I'm going to test it, but usually the idea itself has been triggered by something that I've observed. So in science, usually observation precedes thinking. We see something, we ask the question, what is this? Now friends, the what, when we say what is something, we have to say, what do you mean, what is it? Don't you see it? It's right there, you see. So the content of what we perceive is given. So Steiner goes on to say, so what is a percept? What is a percept? Well, the percept is filled with content. The percept is filled with color and form and nuance and shape. These are a series, this is a bunch of beautiful percepts, yes? Mm-hmm. Beautiful percepts. What are they? You know? So when I'm saying what are they, I'm not asking about I'm asking the what is art. Nature has given me the percept. Why am I not satisfied with these beautiful colors, you see? But what is what's not given to me? What's not given to me is the idea of these things. That I have to think through, you know? So to say what is a percept abstractly, he says, really is an abstract question. A percept always has content in it, but what is referring to the concept. Yeah? What, why, when, where, how. Yeah? How many, yeah? How much. So the concept is connected with a qualitative and a quantitative manifestation, but the percept is given as it's already saturated. Nature gives us beautiful percepts. We just don't understand what they are until we think we're searching for the ideas. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. So when we ask what it is, what we're asking is, what is the concept? Yeah. The concept is not given to observation. We have to rally ourselves. And if we don't bother to think, we're never going to find the concept.
What if you think too much, then?
Sorry?
But you can also be off balance the other way.
You can. You can spend your time in abstract concepts and never notice that they're beautiful percepts. You know, I'm lost in the ivory tower of thinking, and I'm not paying any attention to these beautiful objects. Yeah? What a pity. Yeah. Yes?
So sort of explaining and defining that's in the world of concepts and ideas. I mean, so we're looking at it as a percept. So then when we call it a rose or a bouquet,
yes,
then we're moving into concept, definition, explanation.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
But rose and bouquet belong just as much to the phenomena as what we're receiving from our senses. That's the point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You see, rose is the name. It's a concept of a phenomena, but the rose is a rose by any other name is just as sweet. Yes. Mm-hmm. Certainly, but you could say, but the concept of rose, the word rose is pointing to a series of ideas that are definite, not a lily. Yeah?
That belong to the percept.
That belong to the percept itself, yeah. So, now, so he says the reason we don't have the whole thing is because although we are participating in a universal activity of thinking, we are participating as an individual. We're not living at the center of the cosmos where percepts and concepts are all streaming from us simultaneously or toward us. Rather, he says we are individual beings living at the edge of creation. And for that reason, because in a certain sense, so he says, then therefore the whole world content does arise in us in two stages, from the side of perceiving and from the side of thinking. But that allows us actually to have our experience of being an individual. The advantage of separating these two things is that I become aware of myself as the observer and the thinker. I become aware of myself as subject. If I were simultaneously united with the idea and the percept at every moment, I probably would not be as conscious of myself. So we have, you can say in a certain sense, if we used to be connected with the world as a monist, as a kind of a oneness, gradually you could say we have separated ourselves off as apparently separate, but in fact, in the act of observation and thinking, we overcome the dualism. We become aware of ourselves as I and the world as apparently separated from us. But now, in fact, we have found bridges to build between these two where we can reunite I and the world. So the act of knowledge actually helps us retain our individuality. We've gained our sense of self by apparently separating ourselves from the concept. From having defined the concept through our activity, we've gained something. We've gained self-consciousness. And now we can begin to participate in the world once again as self and the world. Yeah. But when before we fled it, before we fled from it, it was the world, but we weren't aware of ourselves. So we could say this is a journey from a unity to a duality or to a polarity. But by performing the act of observation and thinking, we're reuniting ourselves with the world, and we are able to retain consciousness of ourself. This is an important step toward freedom. We certainly can't be free if we're not aware of ourselves. You with me? So we begin to see the advantage of this, even though it's, I have to say, friends, it's annoying, yeah? It's annoying to have something present itself to your observation and you can't quite, immediately, you can't figure it out. You have to do some research. Now, more and more, we're using the internet to seek for the concepts. I have to say, friends, it's wonderful, and on the one hand, it's wonderful that we have such amazing connection to the world of ideas through the internet. My friend Ted Mahler calls it the Google. You have a question, you just put it into the Google, and the Google will immediately spit out the answer. But in a certain sense, what we're really doing is somebody had to think about what the question that we're asking, and someone has put those answers in. But effectively, we want to exercise our own capacity to think as well. We need to be able to do that. If we just become a bunch of button pushers, we're really missing. We're missing out tremendously. So he says, everything depends on the relationship between other beings and beings that we ourselves are. This is on top of page 83. Yeah. Well, actually, the bottom of 82. From a many-hued whole, our eye can comprehend only a succession of individual colors. From a connected conceptual system, our reason or our mind can grasp only individual concepts. The separation is a subjective act. It depends on the fact that we are not identical with the world process. Rather, we are single beings among other beings. Top of 83. Everything then depends upon determining the relationship between other beings and the beings that we ourselves are. This determination must be distinguished from merely becoming aware of ourselves. Becoming aware of ourselves depends upon perceiving, as does awareness of everything else. Perceiving myself reveals a number of qualities that I combine into the whole of my personality. Self-perception does not lead me outside the realm of what belongs to me. But self-perceiving must be distinguished from self-definition through thinking. Just as in thinking, I integrate a single percept from the external world into the context of the world, so likewise through thinking, I integrate the percepts of myself into the world process. So my self-perceiving, if I'm just perceiving myself, friends, how do we perceive ourselves? What would you declare to be a percept of yourself? How about your feelings? I feel, therefore I am. My opinions, yes. My opinions are my opinions. So our feelings, our opinions, our body, yeah, allow us to have a perception of ourselves. Even my thoughts, the thoughts that I thought so far, are mine. Yes, they're my thoughts. Yeah. So in a certain sense, we're like little kids. This is mine, But in a certain sense, self-perception, our feelings belong to us, our memories belong to us, our body belongs to us, at least temporarily, although it keeps changing. Yeah. So the self-percept, in a certain sense, when we perceive ourselves, we sink into our subjectivity. We think we are more aligning. We're perceiving ourselves as subject. We're perceiving ourselves as separate from the world, because we can distinguish what belongs to us and what belongs to the world. Yeah. So he says, my self-perceiving encloses me within certain limits. But my thinking has nothing to do with these limits. On the one hand, I sink into myself, into my subjectivity with my feelings and my body and my percepts and all my mental pictures and my own knowledge. Yeah. That allows me to distinguish myself as a separate being. On the other hand, when I think, I am participating in the same activity that everybody else is participating in. When I'm thinking, I'm participating in a universal activity, but when I'm feeling and acting, I'm actually participating in myself. So we begin to see that the human being actually has two activities going on. There are parts of us, the part of us that is feeling and acting in the world is what we call ourself. The part of us which is thinking, however, the degree to which we are thinking, we're participating in a universal process, the same way that everybody else does it. Now, I'm not saying that everybody else thinks what we think, not at all. But the activity of thinking, you would not understand a single word that I am saying if you were not able to take what I'm saying as the content of your observation and think it through. Does anybody not understand what I'm saying when I ask that question? See, so how do we understand each other? If we were completely isolated, we wouldn't. We would have nothing to say. So there must be something that we're all capable of doing. You can hear my words, you can look at my gestures, you can look at the imploring gestures I'm trying to make. I'm begging you to understand me. But on the other hand, you're thinking, yes? And your thinking actually connects you to me. We understand each other. How do we do that? On the one hand, we're completely we're living in these different bodies and we're very much individuals. But on the other hand, we understand each other because we assume, well, not only assume, we have had the experience that what we do give to each other to observe, we can think through and come to an understanding of each other. We can understand each other's thoughts. Yeah? We may not agree with each other's thoughts, but we can understand them. Yeah? Democrats and Republicans may not agree, but they understand each other. Yeah? At least they understand what they don't agree with. Yes? So my self-perceiving encloses me within certain limits, but my thinking has nothing to do with its limits. In this sense, I am a twofold creature. I am enclosed in a realm that I perceive as a part of my personality. My personality is my experience. My experience are all the mental pictures that I formed. We're going to come more clearly to what a mental picture is in a moment. Yeah? But our thinking, so I'm enclosed, I perceive my personality, but I'm also the bearer of an activity that determines my limited existence from a higher sphere. Our thinking, unlike our sensing and feeling, our thinking is not individual. We have to really come to this picture. Our thinking is actually universal. Yeah? Only because our thinking is related to the individual's feeling and sensing does thinking receive an individual stamp in each individual human being. Human beings differentiate themselves from one another through these particular colorations of universal thinking. There's only one concept triangle that makes no difference to the content of the concept of triangle. Who's thinking it? We all have the same concept. What is a triangle? Three straight lines, yes. Three straight lines intersecting, yes. Polygon, yes. Yeah.
I say, if you say 3 sticks, you might be thinking of an A.
Okay, yes. Doesn't have to be, yeah. So we all have the same concept of a triangle. So it's not that each one of us has our individual concepts and that each one of us has made it up. The concept is universal. The concept of triangle means 3 angles, yes. So the concept triangle, we're thinking the same concept. Yeah. We're thinking it individually, subjectively, but that concept actually is a universal concept. We're not adding the concept onto what we're observing. The concept is there. The concept of triangle is there. So he says naive human beings, I had them up here, naive human beings think that they build their own concepts. They think that the concept is constructed by the individual and added onto the content of what we observe. He says, it is really important. They believe, so naively we believe that every person has individual concepts. It is a fundamental requirement of philosophical thinking to overcome this prejudice. That we all have our ideas, but our ideas have nothing to do with reality, and our ideas are merely stuck on to reality. Yeah. The single unitary concept of the triangle does not become many by being thought by many thinkers. For the thinking of many thinkers is in itself a unity. In thinking, we are given the element that unites our particular individuality with the whole of the cosmos. When we sense, feel, and perceive, we are separate. When we think, we are the all-one being that penetrates all. This is the deeper basis of our dual nature. Within us, we see an absolute force come into existence, a force that is universal. That's the force of thinking. Yet we do not come to know it as a stream's force from the center of the world, but only at a point on the periphery. If we came to know it as a stream force from the center of the world, we would know the whole riddle of the world at the instant we came to consciousness. But since we stand at a point on the periphery and find our own existence enclosed within certain limits, we must find out about the realm situated outside our being with the help of thinking that extends into us from universal world existence. Could we say that Rudolf Steiner has just told us that thinking is extending into us from universal world existence? In thinking, we are participating in universal world existence. In feeling, we're participating in our own self-experience. The urge for knowledge arises because thinking in us reaches out beyond our separateness and relates itself to the universal world existence. Beings without thinking do not have this urge. If other things confront them, no questions arise. Other things remain external to such beings. For thinking beings, a concept arises from the encounter with an external thing. The concept is a part of the thing that we do not receive from without, from within, but rather from within. Knowledge or cognition is meant to accomplish the balance or the union of these two elements, the outer element and the inner element. So a percept, therefore, is not finished and closed off. It is one side of total reality. On the other side is a concept, the act of knowing. The act of knowing is the synthesis of the percept and the concept. Only percept and concept together make up the whole thing. So the preceding discussions demonstrates that it is meaningless to look for any common element among the world's individual entities other than the conceptual content presented by thinking. Any attempt to find a world unity other than the self-conceptual conceptual element, which we gain by thinking contemplation of our percepts, must fail. For us, neither a human personal God, nor force, nor matter, nor even the idealist's will can be considered the universal element of the world. All these entities merely belong to a limited area of our observation. We are projecting our limited experiences upon the universal process and identifying the universal existence as a projection of our own immediate experience. But we have no right to do that. Yeah? So, we perceive a humanly limited personality only in ourselves. We perceive force and matter in external things. As for the will, it can be seen only as an expression of our limited personality's activity. So Schopenhauer would like to express the world as will. Schopenhauer was the philosopher of the will, and he always said the will is the fundamental thing. Rudolf Steiner says no, thinking is actually the fundamental thing. You'll never understand the will unless you understand the thinking. Bless you. So Schopenhauer feels that the will moving through the body, every time I will, my body moves, that is definite and knowable. Yes, my will is the one thing that I can know with certainty. My thinking is abstract to Schopenhauer. And Steiner is saying, but the will expressing itself through the body is just a percept among other percepts. A percept by itself can only be understood by thinking about it. So even the movement of my body is something which I can perceive, but a percept is only half of reality. I have to understand the idea that's moving through the movement itself. The idea guiding the movement would actually give me clarity. So he said, we have to be clear that if a percept is filled with content, but a percept without the idea there's tremendous richness in everything we're perceiving. These are absolutely wonderful, yes? absolutely wonderful percepts. But once we begin to think about them, we begin to understand, we begin to put them into the rightful relationship to each other through thinking. Yeah. So, he says, now thinking comes to us from, on page 88. Thinking brings its content to the percept out of the human being's world of concepts and ideas. In contrast to the content of the perception, which is given to us from without, thought content appears from within. We shall call the form in which thought content first arises intuition. Okay, so we're going to write on the board over here, intuition. Intuition is the content of the world thought beginning to approach me, but it will touch me from within, intuition. So the question came up yesterday about intuition. Intuition is actually the experience I have of an idea arising in me. When you have an idea, what happens? Does it appear somewhere outside you? You experience it from within, and do you get excited? Yes, don't you? Yes, because, and usually an intuition will arise because you've asked a question, you've gone on a quest, and the intuition is, oh my gosh, wow, now I see. So intuition arises from within. You may be gazing out in the world with great joy, but the truth of the matter is you're just expressing the beauty of something that's arisen within you. Something inwardly has touched you that is giving you an exuberant relationship to the world, yeah? Oh, now I see. Where? You know? So it's not something I'm seeing out there, I'm actually seeing it from within. So an intuition actually is the experience we have of an idea or a concept arising in us. And if we are not just blocks of wood, we get excited about ideas, we get excited about concepts. Yeah? Because they're really an important experience. But the experience, the joy of having a concept, of having a new idea dawn, usually it comes with a feeling of pleasure. Unless it's, uh-oh, where are my car keys? You know, that's an intuition that's going to lead me to a sinking feeling. You know. So, but for the most part, intuitions will bring us concepts and ideas, and hopefully we have a joyful response to them. So thinking brings so we shall call the form in which thought content first arises intuition. Intuition is for thinking, as observation is to perception. Yeah? So observation and perception, we see we have the activity of perception over here. Yeah. Perception is bringing us something that's related to observation, and thinking is bringing something which we call intuition. Perception can be perceiving. The thing about perception, friends, is perception can bring us information from without. Yeah? But I can also turn perception, I can also perceive a mental picture or a feeling or a memory from within. But perception brings me something that I can observe, and the content of whatever it is, whether it's an object or something that I've previously experienced, I place it before me as the object I'm observing, and I think about it. The concepts that arise, though, arise from within. So in a certain sense, we're trying to make a model here that will begin to give us an experience of reality. So intuition and observation are the sources of our knowledge. Full reality remains closed off to anyone without the ability to find intuitions corresponding to things. Just as a colorblind person can only see shades of brilliance without hue, so a person without intuition observes only unconnected perceptual fragments. So we need intuition very much. Yeah? Through thinking, over in the middle of page 89, through thinking we join together into one everything we separated through perceiving. Now that's a radical way of saying it. We separate the world by perceiving it. We unify the world by thinking it. Interesting, yeah? That is, we separate the world because we break it into parts and identify a particular concept. But when we think, when we find the reason, the idea, we're actually bringing it back together again. So we divide the world into individual parts, and then we unify the world by coming back to the idea, by reasoning, finding the whole thing again. Now, over on page 90, yes, he talks about the percept. What is the percept? It is what the percept is for conceptual intuition. Now, on page 92, he's going to characterize a mental picture. The capacity to produce an image. So again, if I stand in front of something and I retain an image of it after I've stood in front of it, I retain something of the percept. Yeah? Who's been to the Grand Canyon? Yes, that's all, yeah. So do you still see it in your mind's eye? Would you have a picture of it if you've never seen it?
Not the same.
Not the same, yeah. So the picture that you have of the Grand Canyon, you're not standing on the rim right now. You're not walking down. Anybody take donkey rides or how'd you get? Yeah. So all those wonderful pictures that you have are pictures that you actually had as direct percepts, but now you're not having them at the moment, but you're having the memory of them. Those are the mental pictures which you have retained. The mental pictures belong to the subject, yeah? And your companion on those same journeys will have different mental pictures. Yeah? Even though they were apparently seeing the same thing, they were also having different feelings and different thoughts about them. Yeah? So the mental pictures are completely subjective. They're completely subjective. On the one hand, they're subjective insofar as they belong to the individual, but they were given to us through our perceiving something, which was available for other people also to perceive. But there's a picture. The picture part of the mental picture is what we've retained of the percept, and the mental part is the concept. So mental picture is actually not a bad word, or mental image, or mental representation, because you could say the image or the percept part and the idea are brought together in those two words. Mental is referring to something of the mind, and picture is referring to something of the percept. Yeah? So the concept and the percept together constitute the mental picture. So in a certain sense, Rudolf Steiner has freed the word mental picture from the content of what we're perceiving. The mental picture is the after effect. Now friends, if I perceive something and I never think about it, I won't have much to say about it. If I travel the world and I'm gazing out the window of the train and the airplane and the dog cart and everything else that I'm experiencing in the world, walking through the world, if I'm observing it but I'm not thinking about it, I will come home again. And someone says, "So Brian, where have you been? I haven't seen you for 3 years." "Oh, I took a trip around the world." "How was it?" "Oh, it was really neat. I saw lots of things." "So, what'd you think?" "I saw lots of things. I don't know." So if I didn't form any thoughts about any of it, I won't have much to retain. I won't even be able to retain the pictures very well, unless I've at least said, "Well, when I was in Tibet," then all of a sudden I can tune into a group of pictures. But if I haven't formed any thoughts about those pictures, I haven't formed a mental picture. I don't retain much. See? There's two extremes here. I can be a world traveler who never thinks. The world of observation can be completely open to me, but I never think about it. But on the other hand, I can also just be a thinker who never goes out and travels. I don't know the Grand Canyon. I only know the pictures that I've seen of it. But one day I'm going to stand in front of the Grand Canyon and I'll have the percept of the Grand Canyon, and the mental pictures that I have will be a lot better than the images I've seen of the photographs of it. Yes, so I can think about going to the Grand Canyon, but I won't produce many percepts unless I go to pictures. Yeah. So I can be an abstract thinker and never experience the world. Or I can experience the world and never think about what I'm experiencing. But friends, if you're going to be a teacher, if you're going to be a living human being, wouldn't it be nice to do both? You see? So we want to get really good at observing, and we want to get really good at thinking. So interestingly enough, Rudolf Steiner, in his exercises in how to know higher worlds, helps us get better at observing the world, focus our attention on observing the world, and also then focus our attention on developing a rich inner life. developing a rich life of observation and developing a rich life of intuition, of inwardly thinking about the things. Because if we strengthen these two capacities, we become a stronger and more complete human being. Do you get it? Let's take a break. Friends, we're almost done with chapter 5. We have to go just a few, one reset. Rudolf Steiner says, first of all, I think again in the addendum to chapter 5, he says really, he's not taking issue with Kant. He's not taking issue with von Hartmann. He says he's taking issue with these ideas that we have to wrestle our way through to come to clarity about how we understand ourselves in relationship to the world. Remember, the first task is, can I know myself well enough that I can gain certainty in knowing the world? This is what we've been doing all these hours, is trying to gain a picture of how we actually operate. And critical idealism and naive realism and so forth, illusionism, transcendental realism, all these are attempts to try to understand the nature of the human being. But we can see they also, and they're courageous attempts, but they're not completely perfect. We found flaws in them. So Rudolf Steiner was actually positing something else. He did not do this drawing. This drawing is my construction. But I'm trying to follow what he's saying and just give it a visual expression. Yeah? When he says, for example, the mental picture arises between the percept and the concept, this drawing is trying to be faithful to that idea. And that the content of observation and the content of thinking are the two sources of knowledge. I'm just trying to graph what he has said. So we could say this model is just, it's an image of the way we actually, I think, an image of the way we actually operate. And if we can begin to follow his logic and his presentation, he says we need to refute ourselves. We have to live through the pain of critical idealism. We have to feel the isolation. We have to feel how drawn back into ourselves and how unknowing we are in relationship to the world to be able to come through to the light of understanding. So I hope the journey has been worth it. It's been painful, but we hopefully are now standing on the top of the mountain. We've climbed up the slope, and now the question is, how does the world look from here? Yeah. Any questions? Please.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So right before break, we were talking about thinking and perceiving.
Yes.
Perceiving and observing are different.
Well, again, he's using a variety of words.
He sometimes uses perceiving. So that's where I got stuck, because I found perceiving synonymous with what he might use for observing something else.
It is related to it. And so the wonderful thing about Rudolf Steiner, and the maddening thing simultaneously, he doesn't define his terms too narrowly. See? Yeah. And he actually says, rather than defining a term, you characterize something by using many different descriptions from many different points of view. And you might use different words to characterize a different aspect of the same phenomenon. So perceiving and observing and observation and percept are all pointing to, they're characterizing the content that we receive through our senses from without, but they also characterize, and this is the remarkable thing, also they characterize what we're feeling and what's arising from within us. A memory that I have also is a percept. It doesn't come directly from the sense world, it's a memory arising from within. But when I'm putting it at the center of my focus as a content of my observing, I can observe a memory. I can remember the first person I fell in love with, vividly, painfully. So that can represent itself to us, yes? And we can put our full attention on that memory, and the memory will be a percept. It just won't be a direct percept of the object, but it's a percept of a memory. It's a mental picture that I'm representing to myself. Yeah?
Thank you.
So in that sense, a percept is very permeable. Yeah? It can be the direct experience of an object. It can also be a mental picture or a feeling that presents itself to me that I am then going to think about. Yeah? So he's characterizing with many different words this general experience. So thank you for pointing out the fact. He's not consistent. And sometimes I think he's intentionally not consistent in the use of words because he doesn't want us to define it too narrowly, and he wants us to have to think. So what does he mean by observing, or what does he mean by perception?
That helps a lot, actually.
Yeah.
The whole, the sense I get of characterizing rather than defining is, it's much more to work with.
Yeah, there really is. In fact, he says that's the key to education, is not to define. You know, many of us were educated to define a term and, you know, spit it back out on the test. That's actually, it kills the concept, and in a certain sense it narrows the percept too much. But to characterize something, to say, do you understand something? Yes, and I can add to it my own insights, yeah? So that means knowledge is actually living, it shouldn't become too dead. Yeah? So this is the axis of knowing, where the concept and the percept together constitute the thing. Yeah? And our subjective representation of that is going to be a mental picture.